When the Republic P-47 Thunderbolt first appeared over Europe in early 1943, the German Luftwaffe didn't exactly panic. In fact, they laughed. Compared to the sleek Messerschmitt Bf-109s and the elegant Focke-Wulf FW-190s slicing through the clouds, this new American fighter looked like it had been built by a blacksmith rather than an engineer. Its fuselage was thick, its wings looked short and stubby, and its massive radial engine made the nose look like a barrel with wings. To the battle-hardened German pilots, it was an ugly joke, slow, clumsy, and clearly no match for their finely tuned warbirds. They even gave it nicknames mocking its shape. The Jug, short for juggernaut, but also used as an insult, as if it were a flying milk jug. The Germans were confident. Their fighters had ruled the skies for years. And now they saw this bulky newcomer as just another easy kill. Early encounters seemed to confirm it. P-47 pilots often struggled to keep up in tight turns, and its massive frame didn't climb as quickly as the nimble Bf-109. From the ground, German spotters reported that it moved like a fat duck through the air. And in an era when sleekness often meant speed, the Thunderbolt's thick curves made it look outdated before it even fired a shot. But there was something the Luftwaffe didn't yet understand. The P-47 wasn't built to dance, it was built to destroy. Beneath that thick armor was a Pratt & Whitney R-2800 engine, one of the most powerful engines ever strapped to a single-seat fighter. It could absorb terrifying amounts of punishment, dive faster than almost anything in the sky, and most importantly, carry 8 50-caliber Browning machine guns, 4 in each wing. In the hands of a skilled pilot, that firepower could shred anything foolish enough to cross its path. Still, early in 1943, the German pilots didn't know that. To them, the P-47 was just another Allied experiment destined to fail. They laughed, they mocked, and they bragged about how easily they'd swat it from the sky. But that arrogance wouldn't last long, because soon they'd find out what happens when a flying barrel starts shooting back. And when its 8 Brownings opened up, the laughter would stop instantly. What the German pilots saw as a clumsy, overweight target was, in reality, a technological monster disguised as a joke. The P-47 Thunderbolt wasn't built to impress the eye. It was built to survive, to dive, and to dominate the high skies where German engines gasped for air. Under its thick skin roared the Pratt & Whitney R-2800 Double Wasp, an 18-cylinder, 2,000-horsepower beast that gave the Thunderbolt raw power unlike anything else in the Allied inventory. But the real secret wasn't just the engine. It was what sat behind it, a massive turbo-supercharger system running through the belly of the aircraft, forcing compressed air back into the engine and giving it unmatched performance above 25,000 feet. That was the altitude where the Luftwaffe once ruled uncontested. Their fighters performed best in mid-altitude engagements, where agility and quick climbs were everything. But up high, the thin air turned the tide. While the German planes began to lose power, the P-47 kept pulling harder, faster, and stronger. Pilots who had once mocked the Jug suddenly found themselves chasing a machine that could dive like a stone, yet recover like a hawk. And that dive, it was the stuff of legend. German pilots learned, often the hard way, that once a P-47 pointed its nose down, it could plummet at nearly 500 miles per hour, a speed no German fighter could safely follow. Many tried, and some never pulled out in time. The Thunderbolt's thick wings and strong frame could handle brutal G-forces that shattered other aircraft. It could take damage that would cripple most fighters. Holes in the wings, bullet-riddled fuselage, even missing chunks of tail, and still limp home to base. Then came its real punch. 8 Browning M2 50 caliber machine guns. Each fired at roughly 800 rounds per minute, creating a torrent of lead that could saw through enemy planes, tear up tanks, and shred trains. One short burst, just 2 seconds long, could put over 100 half-inch bullets into a target. That kind of firepower didn't just kill, it erased. Suddenly, the fat duck wasn't funny anymore. Luftwaffe pilots began radioing warnings. Achtung, Thunderbolt! And when that name came over the airwaves, everyone knew what it meant. The Americans had brought a storm, and it was made of metal and fire. But the true fear didn't sink in until the first real encounters, when German aces met the Jug head-on and realized this beast wasn't going down easy. By mid-1943, the laughs had started to fade. The Luftwaffe was still confident. They had their elite aces, their beloved FW-190s and BF-109s, and years of combat experience. But that confidence began to crack the moment the P-47 started fighting back. One of the most famous early encounters happened on June 26, 1943, when Lieutenant Robert S. Johnson of the 56th Fighter Group found himself alone, badly damaged, and hunted. His P-47 had been ambushed by a formation of FW-190s, sleek, deadly, and flown by one of Germany's top aces, Egon Meyer. Cannon shells ripped into Johnson's Thunderbolt, punching holes through the fuselage, shredding the tail, and even jamming the canopy shut. Oil sprayed across the windscreen, the controls were stiff, and his fuel tank was leaking fast. By every rule of aerial combat, he was finished. Meyer closed in for the kill. He made multiple firing passes, raking the P-47 with bursts of 20mm cannon fire. But Johnson's aircraft refused to die. Even with hundreds of rounds tearing through it, the Jug kept flying, refusing to give up. Johnson could hear the German ace circling behind him, emptying his guns in disbelief. Meyer eventually pulled alongside, looked at the shot-up Thunderbolt, and reportedly gave a salute, half in frustration, half in respect, before breaking off and flying home. Johnson somehow managed to return to base, his P-47 riddled with over 200 holes, yet still airworthy. That story spread like wildfire through both sides of the front. For the Americans, it was proof that their new fighter was tougher than anything in the sky. For the Germans, it was a warning. This wasn't a clumsy machine. It was a flying tank. Luftwaffe pilots began reporting that Thunderbolts could take hits that would shatter a Messerschmitt and still dive away untouched. Those early skirmishes changed everything. The Germans had underestimated an opponent that could not only hit hard, but refuse to die. Their mocking nickname, Jug, suddenly felt fitting in a new way. This plane really was a juggernaut, rolling forward no matter what you threw at it, and as the air war intensified, the P-47's purpose evolved beyond dogfights. Soon it would take its power to the ground, and that's when the real destruction began. By late 1943, the Thunderbolt had already earned respect in the skies. It was fast, durable, and terrifying when its guns lit up. But as the war evolved, so did the P-47's mission, and what came next turned it into one of the deadliest ground attack aircraft ever built. The shift began when long-range escort duties started to move toward the lighter, more fuel-efficient P-51 Mustang. The Mustang could fly deep into Germany and back, protecting bombers all the way to Berlin. That left the P-47 free to do something it was naturally born for: hit the enemy where it hurt the most, on the ground. The Thunderbolt's rugged design made it perfect for low-altitude punishment. It could shrug off small arms fire, stay stable under heavy load, and carry a frightening amount of ordnance, bombs, rockets, and those 8 relentless 50 cal Brownings. The Americans began loading jugs with up to 2,500 pounds of bombs, nearly as much as a medium bomber, turning a single-seat fighter into a flying artillery platform. When D-Day arrived in June 1944, the Thunderbolt was unleashed over Normandy. From sunrise to sunset, swarms of P-47s roared over German lines, hunting tanks, convoys, and trains. Soldiers on the ground described the sound as a thunderclap rolling across the sky, fitting for the plane's nickname. And when the 8 Brownings opened up, the effect was devastating. Steel tore through armor plates, fuel trucks exploded in fireballs, and entire columns vanished under a storm of lead and fire. German troops began to dread that distinctive engine rumble. Even if you didn't see the Thunderbolt, you could hear it. A deep growl that meant seconds later, everything around you might be on fire. One Wehrmacht officer reportedly said, "The Thunderbolt is the most terrifying machine on Earth. It attacks with the fury of a god." By 1945, the Luftwaffe's fear wasn't just in the skies. It was on every road, bridge, and railway. The same aircraft they once mocked as a flying barrel had become the hammer of the Allied advance, crushing everything in its path. But the transformation wasn't just mechanical, it was psychological. The German pilots who had laughed at the P-47 were now forced to adapt, respect, and fear it. And as the war pressed on, their perspective would change even more dramatically. By 1944, the Luftwaffe wasn't laughing anymore. The once mighty German Air Force that had dominated Europe early in the war was now bleeding pilots, planes, and morale. And the P-47 Thunderbolt was one of the biggest reasons why. What began as mockery had turned into something else entirely, respect mixed with fear. German pilots who had once bragged about dancing circles around the fat American fighter began filing reports that told a different story. They called it Der Donnerbolzen, the Thunderbolt, and their words were heavy with reluctant admiration. One Luftwaffe ace admitted, "It was not elegant, but it was unstoppable." Others complained that the P-47's dive speed made it impossible to pursue safely. In one account, a German pilot chased a Thunderbolt in a vertical dive, only to black out from the G-forces while the Americans simply pulled up and climbed away, still intact. It wasn't just speed, it was survivability. The P-47 could take hits that would rip apart a Bf-109 or FW-190. Its massive radial engine acted like a shield, absorbing fire that would have set inline engine fighters ablaze. Many Luftwaffe aces noticed this firsthand. They'd pour cannon shells into a Thunderbolt, watch it smoke and sputter. Yet it kept flying, kept shooting back, kept refusing to die. One name stood out among those who learned this the hard way: Hans Philipp, one of Germany's most celebrated aces, credited with over 200 kills. In October 1943, Philipp engaged a formation of P-47s near Münster. Accounts suggest that after scoring a hit on one Thunderbolt, he was suddenly ripped apart by return fire. His aircraft went down in flames. To this day, many believe the Jug's 8 Brownings ended the career of one of Germany's most feared pilots. That story spread quickly through the Luftwaffe ranks. They began to change tactics, avoid Thunderbolts above certain altitudes, avoid long dives, and never underestimate their firepower. Some even warned rookies, "If you see a Jug, don't get cocky. One burst from its guns, and you're gone." What had once been a joke had become a nightmare. The Luftwaffe's elite, who had mocked the Thunderbolt as a clumsy brute, were now forced to acknowledge a brutal truth. This beast had earned its reputation the hard way. But the P-47 wasn't finished yet, because while the Germans learned to fear its armor and speed, they hadn't yet felt the full wrath of its 8 50 cal guns unleashed in their deadliest form. If the P-47 Thunderbolt had a soul, it lived in its wings. 8 Browning M2 50 caliber machine guns, 4 on each side, waiting to unleash chaos. Each of those guns spat out nearly 800 rounds per minute, and when they all fired together, the air itself seemed to vibrate. Pilots described it like tearing the sky apart, a roar so loud you could feel it in your chest. A single 2-second burst could hurl over 250 armor-piercing rounds toward a target. In the words of one veteran, it wasn't shooting, it was erasing. To the Luftwaffe, that sound became a death sentence. The first time a German pilot saw a Thunderbolt open fire, the sheer volume of tracers looked like a solid beam of light. Fighters shredded in midair, bombers broke apart, and armored trains on the ground exploded under the hail of bullets. Even hardened aces were stunned. One Luftwaffe survivor later said, "American
When a
pilots
Thunderbolt
learned to
fired,
use that
you didn't
firepower
dodge.
with surgical
You
precision. They would dive at insane speeds, sometimes over 400 miles per hour, line up for just a moment, squeeze the trigger, and climb away while debris rained down below. The gun convergence point was typically set around 300 yards, creating a focused kill zone where all 8 guns overlapped. Anything caught inside that zone was simply obliterated. The Thunderbolt's pilots became masters of boom and zoom tactics. They'd dive from above, unleash a storm of lead, and pull up before the enemy could even react. German fighters that tried to turn with them often ended up spinning out or bursting into flames before they could get a shot off. And if a P-47 missed its first pass, it could dive again, faster and deadlier than before. By 1944, Thunderbolt squadrons were credited with tearing apart Luftwaffe formations that had once dominated Europe. One of the most chilling reports came from a German ground observer after a P-47 attack. "It looked like the sky itself was falling on us. The mockery was long gone. The laughter had turned into static-filled radio screams and the crack of exploding engines." The P-47 had earned a new reputation, not just as a survivor, but as a predator armed with the deadliest bite in the sky. But the story of the Jug wasn't just about destruction, it was about dominance. And what came next would cement its place as one of the true kings of World War II's air war. By the time 1945 rolled around, the P-47 Thunderbolt had gone from being the punchline of Luftwaffe jokes to the backbone of Allied air dominance. It wasn't sleek like the Mustang or elegant like the Spitfire, but it didn't need to be. It was a machine built for war in its purest form, raw power, resilience, and devastating firepower, and those traits helped win the skies over Europe. More than 15,000 Thunderbolts rolled off American assembly lines, flooding the skies with unstoppable steel. The Allies suddenly had a fighter that could do everything: escort bombers at high altitude, dive bomb tanks, strafe trains, and still come home riddled with holes but flying steady. Luftwaffe Command began issuing desperate reports about the heavy American fighter that refuses to die. Even the Germans' most advanced designs, the sleek FW-190D, the Me-262 jet, couldn't fully neutralize it. By the time they arrived, it was already too late. The Thunderbolt had carved its legacy in the wreckage of Europe's railways and the smoking remains of enemy airfields. Its presence also reshaped Allied air strategy. The P-47's ability to deliver precise, high-speed ground attacks gave the advancing armies something priceless: real-time destruction of German logistics. Fuel convoys, artillery positions, and even retreating divisions couldn't escape. One U.S. general later said, "If you saw Thunderbolts overhead, you knew victory was close." For the Germans, it was a different story. Their aces, once proud and untouchable, were now outnumbered, outgunned, and constantly hunted. Many Luftwaffe pilots admitted that by 1944, the sight of a Thunderbolt formation meant the end of any mission. The psychological toll was immense. Some even called it the Juggernaut curse, the belief that if a P-47 had you in its sights, you were already finished. And yet, the Thunderbolt's reputation extended beyond fear. It became a symbol of American industrial might, proof that brute force, when engineered correctly, could outperform elegance. It represented a shift in warfare itself, from duels of agility to battles of endurance and firepower. When the smoke cleared and victory banners rose, the Germans who once sneered at the flying barrel were left in awe. The Thunderbolt had earned something even rarer than respect: immortality. But behind that immortality lay a message that echoed far beyond the war, one final lesson written in smoke trails and thunder. By the end of World War II, the P-47 Thunderbolt had done more than just survive. It had redefined what a fighter could be. From the skies over France to the forests of Germany, it became the sound of victory, the symbol of unstoppable momentum. German pilots who had once mocked its bulk and shape were now warning each other in frantic radio calls, "Thunderbolts above, dive away." The laughter that once echoed through Luftwaffe ready rooms had been replaced by silence and respect. The P-47's story isn't just about speed or firepower. It's about perception. It's about how something underestimated, even ridiculed, can rise to dominate when pushed to its limits. The Thunderbolt didn't win by being the prettiest or the fastest. It won by being relentless, a war machine that refused to break, no matter what came at it. In total, it flew more than 746,000 combat sorties, destroyed over 86,000 enemy vehicles, 9,000 locomotives, and 6,000 armored targets. Pilots came home in aircraft that looked like Swiss cheese, bullet holes in every direction, but the engines still roared. One airman once said, "If you wanted to get back alive, you flew the Jug." That was its reputation, the plane that got you home. And the irony? The Germans were right about one thing. The Thunderbolt was big. It was heavy. It did look like a flying barrel. But what they didn't understand was that all of that weight, that bulk, was armor and power. Exactly what made it a nightmare to face. The P-47 turned its weaknesses into strengths, proving that brute force and durability could triumph over elegance and speed. Long after the war ended, surviving Luftwaffe pilots admitted they'd learned to fear the Thunderbolt more than almost any other Allied fighter. One even said, "You could shoot at it all day and it would still come back to kill you tomorrow." So, when people talk about legends of the sky, the Mustangs, the Spitfires, the Messerschmitts, remember the Jug, the one they laughed at, the one that rained fire on everything in its path, the one that taught an entire generation that you never judge power by appearances, because in war, as in life, sometimes the ugly one ends up being the deadliest of them all.